Well, here we go. The theme of the show for the summer is going to be Toronto sports. And we would be foolish if we're covering Toronto sports not to speak a lot about the Toronto Blue Jays. So we're sticking to the Toronto theme. I got the Leaf symbol there. We'll change it to a Blue Jay thing. We said we would, and I guess now's as good a time as any to admit we're going to do it. And I got to say, first of all, we'll talk about the Leafs real quick. Aaron, start with what's your first inclination when it comes to talking about the Maple Leafs?
Well, there was a lot of talk last year about how the Leafs needed more sandpaper and they needed to get tougher, and there were a couple additions that they made. In particular, one of the biggest ones, and he's been around for a couple of years by this point, was Ryan Reaves. And there was some question as to his pugilistic abilities outside of his ability to not be a boat anchor for the team when it came to his play. The unfortunate thing is he had, I think, one fight last season, and that was with Blue Jackets forward Mathieu Olivier, who dropped tennis with him. Unfortunately, it just seemed that there was a lot of circumstances working against him. Arbor Jackeye refused to fight him because Montreal was winning at that particular point in the game. He got scratched against New Jersey the second game of the season. They played Columbus, but Olivier had a broken hand at that point. They played Philly twice. Delirier was hurt for both of those games, and I think Reeves was scratched for one of those. Then they played New Jersey again. McDermott didn't play, and then the next time they played New Jersey, McDermott played, but Ryan Reaves didn't. So outside of the whole lack of pugilistic opportunities, unfortunately, it became relatively obvious to a lot of folks that, unfortunately, despite the cachet that he came with and his reputation, unfortunately, he wasn't necessarily as good for the Leafs as they wanted him to be. So, I think the team's gone in a slightly different direction at this point. Obviously, they've changed some things up. I don't think Pacioretty's re-signed with them. So, I'm wondering what your thoughts are when it comes to team toughness now that they've made some of the adjustments.
I'm going to stick to what I've said to you and anyone who within earshot. My opinion has been and has always been, and you can confirm or deny it's up to you. My opinion has always been not necessarily to have a fighter on a guy that a designated fighter. I've always been the believer that team toughness is more important, because really you got to roll with four lines. And if you've got a guy on your lineup that you can't trust to play 7, 8, 9 minutes a game, right? If you can't trust him to do that, and the only saving grace he has is fighting, and he doesn't fight, that's all one needs to say about this, right? So, no, I thought Ryan Reaves was tough. I thought it was great that he could send a message, but unfortunately, the message he sent was muted by the fact that players didn't care what he had to say from the press box. So, but on the way out the door, there's I'm not impressed with his bitterness, and I'm going to characterize it as bitterness. I'm interpreting his conversations with Marner about Vegas, and some people say, well, friends can talk, players will talk about different teams playing for different teams and stuff like that. But this guy started talking about, the team at fault for him not being on the team almost. That's the impression one gets, that his conversations came around to the fact that I was misused, and therefore I'm glad to be gone. That's why I wanted to leave. So, yeah. So when it comes to pugilism, you have to be a very, very, very well-rounded player to be a notorious fighter in the National Hockey League. And no matter how good a fighter you are, if you can't play, you're not going to be out there every game. You're not going to get dressed every game, because there are going to be times when a coach is going to say, all right, and I'm just giving examples. A coach is going to say, well, this team, is not a fighting, aggressively physical team. We might as well sit him out for this game because we need to fight fire with wire, right? So what happens is, and this is what I feel about guys that are designated fighters, the opportunities for him to play become erased based on the impression he's not necessary. Unfortunately, guys like him are only necessary, or they're not necessary until they are necessary, which usually happens in a game they're not playing. And then you go, okay, I'll put him in, right? That kind of thing. So it becomes a reflex action as opposed to a plan, and I always felt, Aaron, I felt about this for years now. The thing that the Leafs needed is they needed a lot more edge in the rest of the players other than the core four, because the core four didn't bring any, right? They didn't bring any. So they're playing the lion's share of the minutes, and the toughness factor is a lot tinier when they're on the ice, and they can't put a truculent guy who's just strictly a fighter, right, on there. So what they have to do is what they're doing. I agree with it. If they don't make the playoffs, I'll sit here and say, well, they tried it the other way. Now they're trying it this way. If they don't make the playoffs, it's going to be because their asset drawers were empty. Not only were they not, we all are more than aware that draft choices are a premium for the Maple Leafs, but also new young talent is, what this is my, I've said on previous shows that I'm not going to kick Treliving in the butt, right? And I believe in what he's doing. What I haven't said, and I'd like to say that now here today, I wouldn't want his job on a bet. That guy is dealing with at least one arm behind his back. He's got no assets, right? He lost one of his biggest assets and got a third or a fourth line center that's going to play 8-10 minutes a game. That's what he got for a guy that was fifth in scoring. So, and I'm not blaming Treliving on what happened there. That was all on the guy who's not here anymore, the two guys that are not here anymore. The biggest problem was they had an opportunity to trade Marner. They didn't do it, and he couldn't do it because it was his first year, and Shanahan wasn't going to let him do it, because we all know that Dubas said, I might have to do something like this. I might have to break the core four. Next thing you know, Dubas is out on his behind, right? So to finish the idea about the physicality. So what they got to do is they got to look for different kinds of players who protect the group. The group protects the group, as opposed to individuals protect the group.
And I think they've taken some steps to address that. Let's be fair to them here. With getting Nyes signed long term, Max Domi isn't afraid to be a little bit rough and tumble. He has occasionally been known to have a few brain dead moments. They brought in Dakota Joshua. Nicholas Roy is no slouch in that regard either. And Steve Lorentz and Scotty Lawton, a little more grit, a little further down in the lineup. So they have taken some steps in that regard. Unfortunately, where they seem to be a little bit hamstrung is defense currently. But that group really hasn't changed, with the exception of adding Henry Thrun, who's in for 1 year, $1 million.
Seven or eight defensemen. He's a 7 or 8. He's not a 6. He's a 6 if two guys get hurt. If a guy gets hurt or a second guy gets hurt.
He's a high 7.
And
borderline 6.
And he's a problem too, because he's one of the guys that they put him on waivers, he could be picked up.
Yep, that's the other issue.
Right. So there's that, right? The biggest problem, I thought you were going to say, so I'll just say it, because I think the biggest problem they have is a top 6 forward. Not a six forward, a top six forward. They
Right.
need somebody. They need somebody that would not necessarily live up to the scoring standards of Mitch Marner. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is a guy that can score, like Tavares, but be a little more physical. That's the guy they can't seem to get, because those kinds of guys, I think, are at a premium in the National Hockey League, especially with Florida having won back-to-back Stanley Cups. And I think the message is clear. Smash Mouth hockey's back.
Oh, 100%.
Right?
And you're right. They need a guy to play the bumper and bang them in like Tavares, and at the same time can dish out a little bit of physical punishment.
Right.
I mean, Dakota Joshua might go a little bit of the way towards solving that. I know that Scott Lawton and Steven Lorenz are not necessarily the magic bullet that they're looking for, but they can at least partially address some of that.
Well, you're right. What you just said makes total sense if one frames it this way. If Scott Lawton can be really good for, let's say, 25 games, and he sits in that spot. If Ty Domi can be good for 25 games, if the coach has the strings that he can pull to manufacture by a group that position that they need to have some aggressive play and some scoring and the bumper, if you want to talk about it on the power play. My point being that if they got guys that can get a rise up in their game for at least a good portion, a couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks there, it can work for them. It can work for them because it isn't going to be one of those things where they're going to get a Marner. We know a Marner is out of the question, right? We also now know that Nyes is going to be with the team, and I think we both agree. What stage is cloning at right now? Because like if they can clone Nyes, then they'd have the guy they need, because that's what they need. They need another guy like him, a prospect, a guy at a point in his career where he's shown that there's a really good player maybe under that surface, and now this could be his year or years where he's going to show how important he can be. Literally, that's what they need. They need another Nyes. They don't need a Marner. They need another Nyes. But Nyes are hard to find.
They need a Nyes at around 2.9, preferably, if not less.
A Nyes wannabe. Is that what you're saying?
Well, Nyes adjacent for sure.
Yeah. But, they might have the guy in the lineup. If the thing of it is, when you play the kind of hockey that Florida plays, and this is just an observation, this is not coming from an expert, this is just an observation, that if you have a team that plays as a team with that kind of physical, ganging up that they do, right? It's not about your reputation scoring. It's about taking advantage of the opportunities that you have, because there's opportunities there that you can take advantage of because the team is, let's just say, hesitant. Players who play on a team, this is why I'm for this kind of team, because what happens is players become hesitant, and in their hesitance, they leave themselves open to interesting goals that come out of nowhere. And the Leafs have been, over the core four, that is the biggest thing the Leafs have had to fight, was, they had the margin of play. They get power plays, but they don't score. They have the margin of play, but they don't score, because the other teams that they've played have been playing a physical brand of hockey that the Leafs don't, which is give no quarter. And that's what the Leafs are trying to create now. So Leaf fans, you're not looking at a pretty team here. They're not going to be doing pretty stuff. What they're going to be doing is the kind of stuff that disinterests teams in going to the front of the net, disinterest teams in going into the corner, disinterest teams in going toe-to-toe with any individual on the team, because guess what? You're not going to be taking on an individual. That's my definition of the difference between the Leafs of yesterday and the Leafs of tomorrow. And will it work in getting them to the playoffs? I think that's the toughest question in my mind, that kind of team, and we've seen it both years with Florida, where once the playoffs started to come around, the team started to play more, was more effective, but it wasn't effective before December. Either year they won the Cup, Aaron. I think I'm making a fair statement there.
Oh, you're not wrong in that assessment, Frank, I don't think.
And that's what's important, right? What's important is how you go into the playoffs and how you play in the playoffs. But you got to be able to get in there. And this is where Nylander and Matthews come in, and even Tavares, right? This is where they come in. They've got to pick up. They're the guys over last year that have to pick up the slack, which is hard to do because two of those three guys had pretty good career years. So what does that mean? That means they're going to have career years again, and they're going to need a partner in this, wearing, number 34 with the C on his chest. Matthews has to be the player that everybody talks about him being. He has to be that player.
No, for sure. And you're not wrong in that Nylander is going to have to elevate his game. In speaking with the press yesterday, Nylander also mentioned that he was willing to step it up and see if he could take it even further. I know that last year he had 45 goals in 82 games. 2 seasons ago, he had 58 assists in 82 games. That fell to 39 assists last year. He's looking for a way to try to balance his scoring. Keep the goals up, and then at the same time bump his output back up into about the 50 assist range. That would go a long way towards helping most of the fans who called for his head and called for him to be traded in previous years to get over the fact that he's not there anymore. He's been the most consistent player for the Leafs in the past 4 or 5 playoffs, putting up 6 goals and 15 points in 13 games this most recent postseason. And the fact that he's got a little bit of a devil-may-care attitude when it comes to the press and when it comes to fan pressure means that he's, in a way, well positioned to sort of excel here in Toronto, just based on the person that it is.
And Aaron, I like what you're saying, and in the context that there's going to be a vacuum of press attention that Marner basically he took a lot of the oxygen out of the team. Well, there's going to be an opportunity now for Nylander, and he'll to prove how. I don't want to say devil may care, but what I will say is he's a guy who basically is so confident in himself that you can't worry him. You can say whatever you want; it's not going to bother him. And you know what? He's well suited for this transition out of Marner, in my opinion. And I think Matthews is as well. I think Matthews gets an opportunity here to, it's always been him and Marner, right? Sidekick, right?
Yeah.
He's going to get a chance now to show. We're going to find out how much he contributed to the partnership, because I think Marner got a lot more credit. I'm not saying that he deserved, but he got a lot of credit. That there was an inference there that, Matthews wouldn't have had 80 goals without Marner, right? So there it is. There's the challenge.
No, for sure. And there has been additional talk as well of a new player entering the chat, specifically Yegor Chinakhov, who has recently asked for a trade out of Columbus. Now, based on the cap space that they have left, Chinakhov is currently in the second year of his deal, and he only makes $2.1 million. So they could bring him on for a 1 year, see how he does for the remainder of this year, and re-sign him as a UFA if it works out. But he's already indicated that he's looking for a trade. mainly because of the fact that he fell out of favor with management there. But it's one of those things where it could reflect a sea change in the front office, as well as if they do decide to bring him in, because it's more of an acknowledgement of the fact that they need to change how they assess players for the current market. He had 29 points in 53 games in 2023-24, and then 15 points in 30 games in 24-25. He's not necessarily a top-line winger, but he can eat a certain amount of minutes for you if you need him to.
Yeah, but they've got to find a distributor. Yeah. That part of Marner will be missing. His distribution is his calling card. We saw him for Team Canada make a pass that won a series. I guess the other thing that there's the whisper, the inferences, the chatter out there seems to be some thinking that a guy plays for Edmonton right now who's from Toronto could end up putting on the Maple Leaf. So here's what I'm going to say to that. For the fans who go, well, this is just ridiculous. Toronto gets everything, blah, blah, blah. I'll just say this. Well, we lost Marner. You lost McDavid. Sorry, not sorry. It's what happens. But that would solve a lot of problems and create some cap space issues. But I think he would look good in a Leaf uniform.
You know what? I could see that. It would be an interesting move for sure.
But he's got a bunch of people that came in to work for the Edmonton Oilers that are connected to him. His coach is a guy that coached him when he was a kid. He brought in some other people that are in upper management. They're all his people. His former agent works for the Oilers now. They bent over backwards for him. So, it wouldn't be far off the mark for the fans to get a little pissed and the organization get a little pissed if he doesn't stay with the team, because they've literally rolled up the red carpet and everything else to have him there. But I got to tell you, this is pro hockey, and the Leafs have learned that your best players don't necessarily stick around. It's a lesson that every team is going to have to learn, especially if you're a Canadian team. So, keeping players in Canada is getting tough.
Well, the reality is that unfortunately the tax situation is never ideal anywhere where you have to pay them. So, that's one of the major hurdles that the Leafs are looking at here when it comes to attracting other folks. Forgetting, of course, that there are ways to sort of protect yourself against those taxes if you have the right agent who knows what they're talking about. So,
or doing. Who knows
what? Exactly.
Yeah, there's we talked about it one of the previous episodes. There's ways to do stuff. I believe that Tavares bent over backwards trying to figure out how to do it, and by virtue of him not necessarily, he didn't win the court case with the CRA, but the more important thing is he didn't lose the case with the CRA, right? And I know people are saying, "What are you talking about? That doesn't make sense." Folks, you're just going to have to trust me, because when the rubber hits the road, it's not that he was innocent, it's that he wasn't guilty. It isn't that the government didn't have a leg to stand on. They didn't want to share it. And because they didn't want to share it, they committed hara-kiri. And Tavares will benefit from that. We talked about the Blue Jays a little bit, Aaron. Tell me your opinion of the Blue Jays and where they're at right now, and how surprised are you that they're playing so well?
From a season that started not very well at all to where they're currently sitting, second in the American League, first in their division, fourth overall, I'm very pleasantly surprised by this iteration of the Jays. Now, the real question, of course, is going to be how long it's going to stand up for, and is it sustainable? But with a 4-game lead on the New York Yankees, and having won their opener, and now their 11th home game in a row, that's a new franchise record, which is awesome for them. Bo Bichette has been absolutely on fire. Kevin Gausman had 8 strikeouts in 7 innings, allowing 4 hits. The lone run he gave up was to Giancarlo Stanton,
Oh,
and
right.
that was in the fourth inning. And that's because he left a splitter hanging in the middle of the strike zone, and Stanton's going to jump on top of that. Bichette really took it in hand, though, in the fifth with a 2-run double. That was the third straight base runner that Carlos Rodon had allowed after walking Springer and giving up a single to Vladdy. Then Rodon retired Kirk and Schneider, and it looked like he might have been able to get out of the inning.
Schneider, I think the guy that was up to bat for 14 pitches.
Oh yeah, no, it was a great battle to watch going back and forth like that. But Volpe made a low throw to first on a Leo Jimenez grounder, and that Paul Goldschmidt couldn't field, and that was his 12th error of the season so far, which is the most among American League shortstops. And that was pretty much all she wrote. So the Jays are now 59-41 and increased their lead over the 55-45 Yankees to 4 games. They're also just a half a game behind the Detroit Tigers for the best record in the AL after Detroit was shut down by Paul Skeens in a loss to the Pittsburgh Pirates. But, after the way that the Jays started this season, there was some question as to whether they'd be able to make the playoffs at all. And where they're currently sitting just after the All-Star break is a good indicator. There was also talk of the AL Central being the class of the league this year, but unfortunately, Cleveland, Kansas City, and Minnesota are all sitting with under 50 wins and under 500 at this point. I think about the only team that might be a buyer come the trade deadline in a few weeks is going to be the Tigers. The rest might be sellers.
And
so
Seattle's in there battling for the wild card.
Oh, for sure.
And
And they're 5 games back of Houston, so that makes things a little more interesting too.
I don't like that idea. That's the last team that beat the Jays in that. Remember the wild card game? Wasn't it them that beat them?
It was.
I'm amazed at the fact that, and the Jays are doing this with the bottom half of their lineup, as far as the hitting is concerned. Their big ticket guy is having a good year. He's having a good year, but he's not having a big ticket year. But this is what, Aaron, this is what we talk about in sports all the time, right? This is a perfect example of what the Leafs need to happen, right? This is exactly what has to happen. Great teams are great because the team is great, not because an individual is great. There's individuals for the most part, they'll get more credit than they deserve. The goaltender will get more credit in hockey. The home run hitter will get more credit in baseball, or the pitchers will get more credit. But it really does come down to a team approach. And I got to say, Schneider impresses me each and every year. I wasn't sure the first couple of years. And the way he got hired, because he was willing to do the stats thing, right? He was willing to play with numbers. It almost seemed like, okay, this is the guy that's willing to do what they want to do. I'm not sure what they're doing is a good idea. And the proof was in the pudding. They did it. They made some bad decisions in the previous playoff, that they went on odds and they didn't go on how a player was pitching. So I hope they learned their lesson from that, because I hope they can do something in regards to not be stubborn and play the game that's in front of them, as opposed to try to turn the game into what they want to happen. Do you know what I mean? That's the thing the Jays gotta do. We've got a team in Toronto now that is out hitting some very expensive teams, and they're doing it with a salary that it's not cheap. So one of the top, like 7 or 8, I think, in the league, something like that. And they're getting good bang for their buck. And the fans here in Toronto, are making a case for, yes, if you own the Blue Jays, winning is a good idea. It's, because the manager was talking about before the game against the Yankees, they had a full house at 6:30. They had a full house at 6:30, and those people were already buying beer and food and spending money as soon as they got there, right? We know that's what's going to happen. So, the motivation to have a winner is clear right now. And it's funny, isn't it ironic? The other thing is, the experts are talking, now that the Jays are playing so good and they're doing really well, they should add somebody. saying to myself, that sounds counterintuitive. I mean, the team's playing really well right now. I'm one of those people that doesn't like the idea of bringing somebody in that might kind of, I don't want to say poison the well, but, might put a dent in the team approach that this team is performing with.
And, when you're looking at the fact that they're 59-41, but their expected win-loss was 53-47, and they've got a plus 29 run differential, why would you want to possibly bring in another body and mess with that chemistry? I mean, looking at David Schneider, he's had very limited usage so far this season. He's only played in 36 games and only had 80 at-bats, but out of that, he's got 14 runs, 17 hits. He's got 5 home runs. He's been walked 16 times, bases off balls. They're getting a really good return on this guy because A, they were looking at the stats, and B, when they do actually put him in, he does actually perform, which is something that they've been missing. Another nice surprise for me has been Addison Barger at third base for them. Right? In the 76 games that he's played, he's had 41 runs, 70 hits, 22 doubles, and 14 home runs. Like, this guy is
key home runs, game winning stuff.
For sure.
But Aaron, if they're going to shop, I think the most important player they could bring in, maybe two arms. I think what you need in the playoffs is pitching, especially if you end up in a situation where you're a wild card, and then you got to come back and play the other team that's fresh, and you have to play against their ace. So I'm not sure about playing with what's out in the field. I believe there's less danger if you bring arms in as opposed to hitters, and as far as chemistry is concerned, because the pitching schedule gets more heightened and there's more opportunity for pitchers.
One of the players' names that has come up in connection with that is Mitch Keller of the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Whoa!
Now, he signed an extension before the 2024 season. Jeff Passan and Kylie McDaniel of ESPN actually listed the Blue Jays as a potential suitor for Keller yesterday. And with the trade deadline coming up on the 31st, he's got a 3.48 ERA, but he's also under contract for another 3 years at a very reasonable $55.7 million. The Pirates need bats, and moving Keller is the likeliest way to fill that void. But teams might decide on
bats.
Well, and that's the question, is looking at the Buffalo Bison, who are they going to try to shift for that sort of thing? Right now, Chicago and the Red Sox are listed as the best fits for him. The Jays starters are currently 25th in ERA over the year at 4.5 and 22nd in innings pitched with 511 and 2/3. It's no secret they've struggled in finding free agents willing to come north. So bypassing the open market to lock in Keller through 2028 could be the way to go. Also,
the World Series will change the map.
Oh, for sure. The other thing that is also one of the players that the Jays could go after might be Zach Gallen. It would be interesting. His ERA is 5.58. He lost to Houston on Monday. That's the worst amongst all qualified starters. But that at $13.5 million, it might be worth bringing him in as well. Because you mentioned a couple arms, he could potentially be a very good fit here. They have a little room to play with. They've got 4 games on the New York Yankees, so there's a little wiggle room for them to try to fit him in. I mean, he's having, let's be frank, a brutal season. Zach is, but the talent's there, and maybe the change of scenery could be what he needed.
Yep. Chemistry though is always at risk.
Oh yeah.
It's confirm or deny. Well, we'll see if they can confirm an asset and bring it in. I'm for a pitcher because you can never have enough pitching in the playoffs. You really need pitching in the playoffs.
No, you definitely need more arms. The more arms, the better. The hitting will take care of itself after a certain point, but if you don't have the arms to go to the distance,
And they need to leave their leave their hitting lineup alone. I just think the chemistry is so good there that that a lot of really good players who really like each other on the team. Keeping that going would be great. And basically, you can, with a pitcher, you can just bring him in when the opportunity arises, because usually in the playoffs it happens where you end up with a tired arm. You have a guy, an ace, that you can't bring him back in 2 days. You can't bring him back sometimes in 3 days, and you want to him back in 4. So if there's somebody that can push the group into a comfortable rotation, then that's, and I think in the playoffs it becomes real. The opportunities for doing stuff like that are much higher.
The Jays have an interesting number of pitchers to work with here. From Barrios to Gosman to Bassett to Hoffman to Yariel Rodriguez to Scherzer. There's another one, Yvi Garcia, Chad Green, Alek Manoah. There's a whole bunch of guys
Manoah's in Buffalo.
Yeah, they all need to sharpen up, and that's really the deal that we're looking at here.
Manoah's a reconstruction.
Yeah, some of them are reclamation projects, and if there's one thing that Toronto sport teams are good at, it's reclamation projects.
Absolutely. Okay, Aaron. Well, I think we did good here.
Yeah, I definitely think we did.
Won't get into it. Listen, hope you're feeling well, and you had a little bit of excitement. I won't go into detail about it, but I tell you, be grateful it ended up the way it did. It always could have been worse, right? So
no, the option to not engage is always a good one to have. Absolutely. So, at the end of the day, I'm in one piece. I'm home. We did the show. I got tacos. There was free booze on giveaway at Union Station. So, it all in the end, it works out.
There you go. Okay. Have a great night.
Yep. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yep. He's Aaron William for Land. I'm Candid Frank Sneezy. Thank you for watching. Everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow. Have a great one, everyone.